Alright, today we are going to go over the Looks tab. We see is over here in the left hand corner. Alright, so first thing we need is a control block. So if you click here on the control tab, I'm going to choose the when space key pressed. So that means whenever the space bar is pressed, something will happen. If you click on the down arrow here, you can choose any key it lists. So if we choose N, every time you hit N, it would run your program. But I'm going to leave it as space. Alright, so let's go to our Looks button tab right here. So our first block is the Switch to Costume blank block. So if we click on the down arrow here, we see it says turtle. And I don't know why, but the default name of our sprite here is called the turtle. I mean, I guess if you kind of like squinted your eyes, maybe it would look like a turtle. I'm not sure. Anyways, the only way that this block will really come in handy is if you have another costume. So there are a few ways to do that. The first way to get a costume is we see up here in our there's a little costumes tab right here. So if we click that, we see the turtle costume. That is what we currently have. If you click on this little paintbrush, it says paint a new costume. If you click that, we see we can draw something. This is a sad little blob man, I guess. Make him green. I guess he's a booger, yeah. So if we hit OK, then that is our new costume. So if we switch back to our scripts tab, so now for switch to costumes, if we click on the down arrow, we see that we have Untitled, which is the one we just created. But since it already is on our Untitled costume, if we select turtle, if we hit spacebar, it'll switch back. Likewise, if we hit the down arrow and choose Untitled and hit the spacebar, our sprite right here will turn back into the one we created. Now, if we go back to our costumes tab, if you right-click our Untitled sprite, we see rename. Well, first we see edit. If we hit that, that means we can add stuff to our costume. So give him some hands, some feet even. Hit OK. And see that changes our sprite. If we right click it again, we can see we can duplicate it. I'll just make a copy of it. If we right click and hit delete, it will delete it. If we right click and choose export, that'll turn it into an image file that we can save. How you would save that is you would right click your mouse, choose save image as, and then you can just give it a name, call it Booger Boy, and hit enter, and you can choose where you'd like to save it. And then if we look on my extremely messy desktop, we see we have our Booger Boy sprite we just chose or created. Alright, so let's go back to Snap. Now if we right click our costume and hit rename instead of Untitled, so if you have a lot of costumes or sprites, then if it's all just called Untitled 1, Untitled 2, something like that, it would get confusing. So let's give it a name. We'll call it Booger Boy. I didn't mean for it to turn out to a booger, it just kind of happened that way. Alright, and we see now that it says Booger Boy. Sorry if this is offensive to anyone. Alright, so that is one way to create a costume. Oh, also if we look on the down arrow, now it says Booger Boy. Another way to use a costume is, or get a costume, is if we hit this little bit piece of paper up here in the top left and go down almost all the way to the bottom, we see a costumes button. It says select a costume from the media library. If we click that, nothing is going to happen for me because I'm currently offline. I'm not on the internet. But if you're on the internet, it will give you a list of costumes you can choose, like a cat, a dog, a boy, a girl, and you can just pick one of those, and it'll be the same thing like this. Now, another way to have a costume is if you can read it right here. If not, I'll read it. It says import a picture from another web page or from a file on your computer by dropping it here. So how we can do that is if you're using Windows Vista, Windows 7, or Windows 8, there is a feature called Snap. Imagine that. But how you do it is if you will click the top of your web page right here, left click, hold the left click. If you drag it all the way to an edge, like keep going until you see how this little transparent box popped up. When that transparent box pops up, let go of your mouse and it'll snap it over here. Now another way is you can just click the top right here. This is the maximize button. If you click that, it'll make it smaller. And of course you can always drag your mouse to the edge of the screen and adjust it manually like that. Alright, so I have a picture here on my desktop. It's called Wood Platform. I was using this for something else. It just kind of looks like a wooden piece of wood. And so how we can use this is if you get a picture on your desktop, you can draw the picture in Microsoft Paint, or you can copy it off of the internet. If you just left click that, hold your left click mouse button and drag it till we get to here, this area, it'll say move. It might not say move on yours, but then let go of the mouse button. See, now we have a new sprite. It is the same one that we drew, that wooden platform. And so that is another costume. And it's even called Wood Platform, so it takes on the name of what it was previously called for your sprite. So if we go here to scripts, and now if we look at our drop down arrow, we have turtle, which is our default. We have Booger Boy, which is the one we just drew, and we have Wood Platform, which is the one we just imported. So we're going to switch back to turtle. Alright, so let's get rid of this block. You can get rid of it by right clicking and choosing delete, or you can left click, hold the left click, hold it down, don't let go, and drag it over here and then let go of the left mouse button and it'll disappear. Alright, our next button is the next costume button. Figure out what that does. When you press space, if you have more than one costume for your sprite, if we click here on the costumes tab, we see that we have the default costume and the two that we made. We'll go back to scripts here. When you hit the space bar, it will just cycle through the costumes, so go to the next. Our next one, if we look in costumes, should be Booger Boy, and then after that should be Wood Platform, and then we'll go back to turtle, and it'll just keep going. So let's go back to scripts. And when we hit our space bar, let's look at our sprite. Oh, it did not cycle. I wonder why. Let's try this. Ah, okay. So you cannot use it by itself. So what this does is it says I have this switch costume to Booger Boy. So if we press space, it changes it to that. And then we have this next costume tab. So normally this would be used in conjunction with a let me find it real quick. Something to do with time. Or a loop, like counting. Let's say, okay, after this happen, after something happens, then do this. So what this is saying is, I'm gonna press. If we're on turtle, switch it back to turtle. it says switch costume to turtle. But if we have next costume below it, so what this program does now is when space key is pressed, switch to turtle, which it's on, and then switch to the next costume. And in our list, our next costume is Booger Boy. But since it happened so fast, oh, so I guess you can't use turtle. So let's put it on Booger Boy. And then if next costume in the costumes list, so I guess it will not default back to the turtle if you have more than one costume. So now if we do it, it should switch to the wood platform. See, so it's on, it switches, it's on Booger Boy and then it goes to wood platform. Now let's see if it'll loop. If I'm on wood platform, yeah, it switches back to Booger Boy. So it just depends on what you're on. Alright, so we have the costume number. This would be used in conjunction with like an operator. I think an operator, or just like a number or something. So like you could set the number to 1, for instance, and then switch to costume 1. But if we click here, this little block, it'll show us what costume our sprite's on, so it's costume number 2. If we click down the down arrow here for Booger Boy, let's get rid of this next costume type. And we can get rid of this also. And we hit space. See, it says it's on costume number 1 now. Alright, so our next tab is say hello for 2 seconds. And I'm also going to make this go away. How to do that is the same way you made it appear. You'll just click on this little check mark next to costume, and we see it has gone away now. Alright, so for this block, it says say hello for 2 seconds. So if we hit spacebar, our sprite right here, he will say hello for 2 seconds, and then it goes away. Now if you click in here, you can delete what is said, and we can type something else like, hi everybody, isn't Josh a great teacher who can't spell? So now if we hit spacebar, he says, hi everybody, isn't Josh a great teacher? But it went away pretty quickly. So we can change our 2 seconds, click in here, hit backspace, and we can change that to 10 seconds. So now if we hit the spacebar key, our sprite will say what we told him to, and you notice it's still up there. It's longer than 2 seconds because we set it for 10 seconds, and you can put that for as long or as short as you would like. Alright, so let's get rid of this. Our next block is the say hello block, which if you look at the previous block, it says say hello for 2 seconds. The difference between these is the say hello for 2 seconds is dependent upon time. So it will only say hello for 2 seconds. Now the regular just say hello block, when we run that, our sprite will say hello, and he will keep saying hello until the end of time, unless you tell him to stop. So that's the difference between these two. Alright. Our next block is the think for 2 seconds, which is similar to the say hello. So if we run it, he'll say he's thinking. Now the difference between the thinking and doing is well, besides graphically, we can see that one is like a text, like a speech bubble, and the other is a thought cloud. But this is kind of just used like if your program to kind of represent something's happening, like something's going on. Like if your program needs to wait for a couple seconds, whatever, you can use this to be like, oh, I'm waiting. And it's the same thing with say hello. You can change it into whatever you want. Like I really like pie. We'll say that for 2 seconds. I really like pie. And then disappear. Next block is just think Same thing as the previous blocks. He will just continue to think. He is a thinker. Alright, our next block is the change ghost effect by 25 block. So if we click this down arrow next to ghost, we see we have a whole slew of options. We have brightness, ghost, negative, comic, duplicate, and confetti. And effect by 25, that is just like the percentage. Like if you have it just by 1, it'll change it very subtly. But if you have it on 100 or maybe even more, it'll be a very drastic change. So let's try this first one, the brightness. So when we press spacebar, we'll notice our character, he's getting brighter. And he is so bright that he has turned white and disappeared. So how you can undo that is let's skip a couple blocks to the clear graphics effect block. And if we run that, it undoes the graphical effects. Now, something else that is pretty nifty, let's disappear him again. You do not have to attach a block to this to make it, and hit spacebar or whatever to make it run. You can, let me apply the brightness effect again. If you just double click a block, like if you tap your left mouse button twice, if you press it pretty quick, like click click, it does whatever is in this block. But if you run a program, we see nothing happens. I'm pressing spacebar to run the program. So even though you can double click something to make it have an effect, when you run your program, that doesn't happen. It only does it individually. A program is just like a collection of instructions all running together. Alright, so we did the brightness, we have ghost. So if we do that, you see our little guy starts to become transparent. I'm going to double click the clear graphics effect. If we click on the down arrow again, we'll choose negative. See what that does. It's making a negative of our character. So we're going to double click clear graphic effect again. If we have comic, you can see that kind of makes it look like an old school comic book, I guess. Let's double click clear graphic effect. We have duplicate. And that just duplicated our guy a lot. So let's clear graphic effect. And our last one is confetti. If we run that, not really sure how this is looking like confetti, but hey, that's the effect. Let's clear it again. Now let's switch back to ghost. We see it says change effect by 25 when we hit spacebar. We see he's oh so subtly turning invisible. But if we change that to 100, now look what happens when we press spacebar. Boom. He totally disappeared. So if we change that to 10, he's still going ghost, but less so than 25 or 100. Alright, so let's get rid of these blocks. Alright, now we have the change size by 10 block. What this does, it will change the size of your sprite by an increment of whatever you have this set to. It says 10, so if we hit space, we look at our sprite, you see he's growing by 10. And we can change that. Let's try negative 10, see what happens there. So if you have a negative number, it'll shrink him. If you have a positive number, it will grow him. Now if we get rid of this block, go to our next block, set size to 100%. That should set him back to his original size. So let's hit space. Yeah, there's his original size. If we want him twice as large, if we click in here and press 200, you should double in size. If we press it again, nothing will happen, because unlike the change size block previously, the set size to 100 just sets it to that size. It's already right now 200% larger than its original size, so it's not going to go any further. If we set it back to 100, you'll set it back to its normal size. Alright, we already went over to our size. I think we did. It just says the percentage that is. So if we go back to our set size to 100 block and change that to 200, if we hit our spacebar, we notice that now the sprite size says 200. Let's change it back to 100. Get rid of this block. And I'm going to get rid of this up here. Alright, so we have a show and we have a hide block. Oh, there it is. If we attach the hide block to it and hit run, it will hide our sprite. If we do the show block and run it, it'll show it. So it's just a way to make them appear and disappear. Alright, here we have the go to front. And with just one sprite, this isn't going to do anything. So we need to create another sprite. So let's just run it real quick to show you. Hitting the spacebar, nothing happens. If we hit the sprite, or sorry, we need another sprite. To do that, over here, we have a add a new turtle sprite or paint a new sprite. We can do both, or either or, it doesn't matter. I'm going to hit the paint a new sprite, and this brings up our familiar little paint editor. I'm going to draw something less offensive than a booger. Hopefully everybody's good with just a nice stereotypical smiley face. Okay, and so now we have another sprite. And to switch, if we go to this sprite's costumes, we see it's different from the other because we have it selected down here. If you select our first sprite, see, it changes. Like for the scripts, for sprite number 2, he doesn't have anything in scripts. So if you make a program for this sprite, our Booger Boy sprite, it's not going to appear in this one's. So if we drag this sprite over on top, you see how he's in front of our Booger sprite? Well, if we hit the spacebar key for our Booger Boy sprite, that brings him to the front. It sends the other one to the back. Alright, or our next block, our last block, is go back one layer. It just depends on how many sprites you have. So if you have 3 sprites on the scene, you'll have 3 layers. So if we say go back one layer, there's only one sprite in front of him. See, it sends him to the back. And that is our looks tab buttons.